Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the G-Force. Today, I am doing a video that is different from every other video on this channel. I'm not doing a Kerbal Space Program video, I'm not doing a rocket launch video, I'm not doing a BeamNG video. Instead, I'm doing an interview. So let's go ahead and get started with that.
You want me to talk to that camera?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And,
Wait.
You start over. Right?
Yeah, I need to start over because I forgot to start recording.
okay, my name is John Smith, and I went to Texas A&M, graduated in 1964. I went from there to General Dynamics in Fort Worth and worked on the F-111 and the B-58 airplanes.
Wow.
Military aircraft, and was there for a little over a year and a half. I left there and went to JSC in Houston, in the Houston area, in 1966, where I was first put in charge of building an Apollo command module. And I worked on that with a couple of guys for quite a while. A friend of mine worked on the lunar module. I worked on the command module. Another guy in our group was in the process of working on and maintaining a trainer of the Gemini module. And that's what our group did. And I worked on that for a while. Then we got into the neutral buoyancy business for the Apollo program, where astronauts go into and out of a command module. They go into and out of a lunar module. They go into and out of the the space station. If you remember the first space station that we had,
Skylab.
And we worked on that, doing entry and exit of those vehicles and working on various space components associated with those vehicles. And then after that, I went out to New Mexico and worked at the test facility in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And there we got into the actual hands-on work of the rockets and rocket testing in the rocket vehicles and the vacuum chambers that we used in conjunction with the rockets to make sure that a rocket would assume altitude within a specified length of time. And we'd let the rockets run for what turned out to be 70 some odd seconds before they attained orbit. And we worked on that. We worked on or worked with the hyperbolic fuels and oxidizers that were associated with that, and the vacuum systems that were associated with that, and all the electronics that were associated with that. And I was out there 27 months. Then we came back to Johnson Space Center, where we worked on a manipulator arm for the shuttle. And I worked on that, training astronauts in use of the manipulators and the payloads, and what else? Let's see. The counterbalances, and we used a lot of flotation devices with the manipulator arm because the arm cannot handle a full weighted payload here on Earth. It can only do it in space. And so we replicated those payloads by using inflatables, not unlike what our Chinese friends did just the other day. and we had payloads of every description you could want. Some weighted payloads we used were counterbalanced using counterweight systems like unto an elevator with cables and weights and pulleys and that kind of thing. And I worked on that for training astronauts on the use of those vehicles for, golly, from 76 to, golly, how long? Around 90. It's quite a while. And then I got into the management side of the thing, and that's not fun. Management is not where you want to be. If you're interested in engineering, you don't want to be in the management side of things. You want to be on the working side, and that requires the design and building of items, of spacecraft and spacecraft parts. And but from about 92 on, I became a section head. The head had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Had 7 guys in my group that worked on the vehicles under my direction, and that lasted until about 1997, where I became a branch chief, and then I had 3 sections under me at that time, still management. And I guess that's about all I can tell you about that, unless you have some specifics that you want to ask.
So, like, do you tell one story you have from your time at NASA? One story.
One story?
Yeah, just like a story of something that happened whilst you were at NASA.
I'm thinking of a funny story.
That's fine.
One of the lunar module pilots in the Apollo program, you may recall the name Fred Hayes. Fred was a Marine, and I think he was a major at the time, and he was practicing coming out of the lunar module, climbing down the ladder, the ascent ladder to the lunar module, and getting on the ground. One time, one lesson, he was coming out of the lunar module. He backed out on the front porch, and he took a step onto the top rung of the ladder, and he got overbalanced, and he turned over and fell off the ladder, and he fell all the way to the ground.
So was this like in the Apollo era neutral buoyancy lab?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't in the neutral buoyancy lab at the time. It was in the water immersion facility, which was a small version. They didn't build the neutral buoyancy lab until much later. And that was one of the funny things that happened. And I'm trying to think of some of another. There are a lot of funny instances that happen. Will that story do? Or
yeah, that will work. That will work.
Fred went on to crash a T-6 out at Ellington Air Force Base. Fred was a good guy. He was a good fellow. But my best friend amongst the astronauts was Ken Mattingly. I got to know Ken better than any of them. I don't have any particular stories about Ken. It's just that we got along very well. And it's just like any other organization you will ever become part of. There are good guys and there are not so good guys. And Ken was one of the good guys. P.J. White was one of the good guys. Fred was one of the good guys. I never had much opportunity to work with Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin, but there's a story about Mike Collins early in the Gemini program that's kind of funny. Me and another guy, the other guy, his name was Joe Zaleski. Joe and I were the ones that started the water immersion facility in Building 5. And he got to know Mike Collins, who was a command module who turned out to be the one of the crewmen for a Gemini flight. If you remember, Ed White was the first guy to go EVA for the United States. And anyway, the particular mission that Mike was on, he was the guy that was supposed to go EVA. So they pressurized, they depressurized the Gemini vehicle, and the suit that Mike had on had an umbilical cord. The cord was coiled up in a bag about yay big, and it was about 20 feet long, and it was about the size of your thumb. And Mike, when that got loose, he was supposed to traverse to the back of the vehicle and then back to the station. And he came out of the vehicle and he happened to turn loose of the vehicle. And because of the coil of that thing, he started doing this. He started unwinding that coil of umbilical cord. And he he had a few choice words for Joe Zaleski because Joe Zaleski is the guy that packed that bag.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I guess everybody knows the corned beef sandwich story about John Young.
Yep.
You know that story.
I think so.
John Young and Gus Grissom were on a Gemini flight, and somehow John had stored that thing away, and nobody knew it. But he got chastised sorely for having it on board.
Yep, I remember hearing about that.
But in the early days of Gemini and Apollo, there were a lot of funny things happen because we were early in the program. We were just learning what we were doing and how to go about doing it, and consequently, we got away with a lot of things that we probably shouldn't have. But anyhow, things turned out all right. I got another story. I got to tell you another story.
Got him rolling now.
This is a shuttle story.
All right.
And I was working on the manipulator arm. And we always had news media people out there. When we were going to have a flight or during a flight, we always had news media people out there. So this one particular flight, I don't remember which, one of the news media people was National Geographic. And if somewhere there's a National Geographic existing today that's got a picture of our manipulator facility on it. And it's at night, and it's got lights on in the payload bay and what have you. Well, this particular producer wanted Story Musgrave. Do you recall Story Musgrave?
He's an astronaut.
He was one of the astronauts. Story had 7 degrees. I think 2 or 3 doctorates and 2 or 3 master's degrees, and Story was sharp.
Wow.
He was smart.
Wow.
Anyway, wanted him to do some manipulator stuff at night. And so I said, okay, we will do that. And it was about 7 o'clock at night, something like that. I told this producer, we will do this, and you got it all lined out with Story, what you want him to do. Yes, we have that taken care of. And Story started doing his thing. I said, we can do this, but at something like 8:30, I've got to send my people home. They can't work past that time. And so if you're not done by then, I'm going to shut you down.
All right.
I'm going to go downstairs. I'm going to turn off the computer that drives this facility. I'm going to turn off lights in the building. So Story was doing his thing, and it came 8:30. The guy was working on the 5th or 6th take of whatever it was he was doing. And I told him, I said, I'm going to shut you down. He says, just one more time. I said, no, we're going to shut this thing down. And I went downstairs and I turned off the computer, and that guy screamed like you can't believe.
Oh,
He
man.
just roared. That I stopped what he was doing. And I said, I told you what we were going to do. We gave you ample time to do it 2 or 3 times. So I've got to send my people home. And we did. But that's another story I like to laugh about.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you for your time, Mr.
Yeah.
Smith.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to show y'all some of the memorabilia that this guy has, such as this plaque that was made with some of the metal from the Apollo 11 crew capsule, or this photo of the space shuttle with astronauts' names written on it. Same with this one. Now, if you remember, he did work on like the space shuttle manipulator arm, so that's why he would get stuff like this. And also, here was a flag that was carried to the moon by the crew of Apollo 16, because he probably worked on some parts of Apollo 16. And you can see just more commemoration stuff. He has a Columbia Space Shuttle model. And look at this photo. This is of the Queen of England when she visited the Johnson Space Center in Houston. A story that John told me after the interview is that the day before she visited, they had to practice eating. Now, don't get me wrong, that has to be the best kind of practicing eating. And guess what? They got a full-on 7-course meal. That is just awesome. With that, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, as this is a completely different type of video that I have never done before. And if you have enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching the G-Force.